Okay. Oh, I see it here, but it's not on the screen yet. Oh, there's. Okay, I hope everyone's still awake. It's a long and very interesting day, but also a bit tiring. So I hope I can keep you awake for a bit longer. So I will speak about digital tools. And well, this whole session has already been a bit about digital, but I think what I will say is also a bit different in that I will also focus a lot on psychological factors. Because I think this is a really nice quote saying, if we're trying to understand the relationship between thing A, the nervous systems, and thing B, behavior, we would do well to study both things with close detail. And I think that is something that we also need to keep in mind. So if we're thinking about personalized psychiatry, of course, today we've talked a lot about biomarkers, genetics, and so on. And the question is now, what can we add in terms of digital phenotypes? So is there something based on, can we use our smartphone? Can we use wearables to add something to the equation here? And this whole idea of digital phenotyping started with Tom Insel not too long ago, 2017, first papers, stating that, well, people have a smartphone, they use it in different ways. You can look how they actually touch their screen, whether there's Bluetooth connections, you have all these kinds of sensors, location, etc., etc. So can we use that to actually say something meaningful about the mental state of people? And I've been involved in the Radar CNS study, as has Femke and Brenda and many other people, where we looked at, where we tried to use passive monitoring to investigate people with depression, also with multiple sclerosis and epilepsy, but these are data on the depression sample. And we found, for example, that people with depression spend less time at different locations, more time at home, they're more travel. But what was really interesting here is to see that there are more within than between person differences. What does that mean? It means that based on this kind of data, mobility data, we cannot distinguish people who are depressed from people who are not depressed. However, when we look longitudinally in one person, we can actually make a difference between moments when people are more active and moments when people are less active, and moments that are less active, or when they spend more time at home, for example, they're more likely to be depressed. So it is not really helpful in creating subgroups of people who are involved in different things, or creating subgroups of people who are more or less prone to depression, but it does help in differentiating moments in time within a person. Similarly, for example, we looked at nearby Bluetooth connections, and you could compare a moment when people had low levels of depression. Here, there is much more Bluetooth connections during the day, hours over the day, than at moments when people are more depressed. There are a lot of, well, this definitely shows promise. There's also a recent review in 2023. I didn't put it on the slide, but it shows there's 29 studies across different disorders, finding that it is feasible to use this kind of data to monitor or to at least differentiate people with certain diagnoses from other people. However, if we are talking about personalized psychiatry, or then the question is, or precision psychiatry, the question is what this really means and how this is really helpful. Because I think one of the issues that we have to deal with is that, and in contrast with the discussions we had earlier, This is not really saying something about an underlying mechanism. It's differentiating people in a certain way. But the question is, what does that mean? And how can we move forward with this? And so I think one of the things that is missing here is that that we're also talking about experiences and experiences that happen in a context. And we already heard that this morning when we were talking about cancer, also further on in the day. There's also this, especially in psychiatry and mental health, a huge contextual factor. And we see that symptoms vary from moment to moment, over the days, over weeks, and that there's huge contextual influences on that. And so it's really relevant to also take that into account. And so I would call it an interactive phenotype. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is then how can we expand it so that it actually becomes something meaningful, that we can understand better what is happening. Okay? You don't like that? There's okay. So one of the things that I've been doing for almost 30 years now is also ask people about their mental state, but not in a retrospective way as we usually do with our questionnaires, but actually at the moment when it's happening. So what we do, we call this experience sampling method. It's also called the ecological momentary assessments. And what we do is typically we ask people several times a day for a number of days with very short questionnaires about their current mental state, how they feel in that moment, what they're doing, but also the context, what they're doing. Are they with other people? What is happening? And so, so we have the open handbook of experience sampling methodology that is freely downloadable if someone is interested. And we also wrote about that in World Psychiatry. And so basically what we can do with that method is look at mental health and psychiatric problems in a much more detailed way. We can look at symptoms as dynamic patterns, and symptoms do vary from moment to moment. These are data for hallucinations, for example, on a score from 1 to 7. Sometimes they're not present at all, sometimes they're very present, and that is just across days. Here as well, paranoia going up and down. So we see patterns of variation. And understanding that pattern of variation will actually also provide us a different way of, on the one hand, getting more detailed outcome measures. On the other hand, also getting a better understanding of what are the psychological mechanisms that drive this variation. And I think we really need to look at that as well. So it is, if we think about creating the right intervention for the right person at the right time, we need to take this whole spectrum into account. And so if we were thinking about outcome measures, we already heard about anhedonia, for example. And so we can also look in real life what that looks like. So how do people respond to certain things? Can they still enjoy activities, for example? When we look at positive affect, for example, we see that here there's a decrease in positive affect in people with an at-risk mental state, also in first episode, compared to healthy volunteers. However, what we see when we actually look at moments when people find something pleasant, when they are in an activity that is pleasurable, we see not so much difference. So we see that the line of at-risk mental state and controls is very parallel, slightly different for first episode patients. But this is actually, this can make us think a little bit more in detail about what do we mean when we speak about anhedonia, and how can we move not just beyond the classical questionnaires that we have and move them to more specific symptoms, but how can we actually move towards daily life and understand how people function in their daily life, how they experience things in their daily life, which is a much more fine-grained way of looking at things. Also, this is a way of understanding, learning how and understanding where these patterns of variation come from. So if symptoms vary over time, how come that at a certain moment someone will become more suspicious or more paranoid, whereas at other moments that won't happen? So here it just disappeared again, and here it's increasing. So it's actually also giving us information about targets for treatment. And then, of course, we're talking about psychological interventions, psychotherapeutic interventions, which are, I think, equally relevant here. So what we want to do is get a better understanding of both what is happening at the neurobiological level, but also what is happening at the psychological level, and can that provide us similar targets for intervention. What is really nice with this kind of data, what is also a nightmare from an AI perspective, is that it's lots of data, that it's multimodal data, that it has missingness, that it comes at random times. It definitely, it does everything that you like so much. But at the same time, it's also very rich data that can provide a lot of information. So what we found, for example, was that if we look at group level, we see that at moments of high anxiety and low self-esteem, people tend to become more paranoid. However, when we do that, when we look at the individual level, it's very different. For some people, paranoia precedes anxiety. For other people, it's the other way around. For some people, low anxiety is associated with more paranoia. So there's a huge difference between group and individualized. And if you look at the individual, and with this kind of very rich data from an individual, you can come to a better understanding of what is happening in that individual person. Because what now, of course, often happens is that we just translate our group, we assume that our group findings are relevant for each individual, and they're not. They're probably relevant for very few people. What we're then currently doing is trying to integrate this sort of measures in mental health care. What we need for that is, on the one hand, the app, so that people can actually provide the data, but then also a dashboard where these data are integrated and where actually a clinician can look at the data together with the client, with the patient, and can make sense of the data. And we're currently running a European project where we're testing this in routine mental health care. And one of the work packages is an AI project, work package where we're actually trying to use AI to push forward the areas where there's most relevant change. So, or the change that is actually most, that will most likely or is most predictive. So in that sense, you're really collecting data that are relevant for the individual. You're trying to understand what is a relevant pattern in this person, and you use it so that you can actually translate that to the patient, and that the clinician can use it to target interventions. And so the goal of this is to, on the one hand, create more empowerment and self-management, but more importantly in this respect is that it will help the clinician to create personalized target for treatment. And one thing that I didn't mention here is actually that it can help to also evaluate treatment better and quicker. Because if you can actually use this to see, well, we gave you a certain medicine or drug or whatever, and then we just evaluate how you're dealing in your daily life. You get a more fine-grained understanding, so you can more quickly see whether something meaningful is changing. But at the same time, you get a better understanding of what is happening psychologically, and whether that is actually, you can also define your psychological treatment to that. An important part there is also shared decision making, so that these data, you actually offer a platform for patients to bring their personalized experience to the table and to quantify the experiences that people have and help them to make sense of their own data. And this is what is actually also happening. So we're currently running this clustered randomized trial. And what people say, what clinicians say, is it helps to gain new insights, to get information from real life data. It helps to map the problems of the client. It gives a reflection and new perspectives of the person. And it's helpful in identifying focus points for therapy or to confirm hypotheses. From the client perspective, they say it guides positive changes in daily life and it helps to train emotional awareness. So I think this is really could contribute to more, to a better understanding of what is happening to a person. I do think that in general, an integration of sensor data and wearable data with this kind of EMA data, ESM data is actually the way to move forward. Because of course you cannot just monitor someone all the time. But I think what would be a really helpful way forward, also to make more sense of this digital phenotyping data or of this wearable data, is that you use wearable data to identify potential moments where something seems to not go so well, and then trigger the EMA, where then people can actually start to self-report and then get a better understanding of what is happening at that moment. We also have to say that it is the digital phenotyping, the sensor data, is promising, but it's also much more complicated than we think. So that also needs still a lot of work, especially it's very, very different measuring in real life compared to measuring in the lab. That's really a completely different ballgame. So if your Fitbit tells you that you're stressed, don't believe it, because it's well, they don't share their algorithms, but it's most likely not reflective of true stress. So there's still a lot of work that needs to happen there, but I think smart integration of the two things could actually help us move forward. Also, I just wanted to show that using this technology, one of the things that I like about the ESM part is that you also make it not only, it's not just about precision psychiatry, but it's also really person-centered. You put the person, you give the person a very active role in their own treatment process. And I think that is something important as well. And we also have some evidence that it's actually helpful. So this is a trial in people with chronic depression. And actually these people, they did a few weeks of ESM and then they received feedback. And they received feedback on the association between the activities they were doing and positive affects. So they actually learned, well, this is how you feel in general. This is how your positive affect is. When you do this activity, your positive affect is higher. When you do this activity, your positive affect is lower. But also, how often do you do these activities? So people got some insight in their own patterns. And then actually, this is what we found. So this is people with chronic depression who all have been on treatment. And what you see is this is a control condition. So actually they didn't change over time. And I here show the self-report, the IDS self-report, but we also have the similar results on the Hamilton. This is a pseudo intervention. So the pseudo intervention is people do the ESM, but they don't get the feedback. So they just self-monitor, they don't do anything else. And this is actually the condition with the intervention where they get the feedback. And what is very interesting is that self-monitoring in itself is helpful. People get a bit better when they start self-monitoring. But actually, once the intervention stops, the pseudo-intervention, they just go back. The people who are on the intervention keeps improving. And so what that shows to us is that, and that's what you often see in this kind of daily life interventions, is that people start to change very small things in their daily life, but things apparently that are helpful and that over time result in bigger effects. We also now did a study in people with psychosis. This was a blended care intervention on acceptance and commitment therapy in daily life. So we combined face-to-face sessions of acceptance and commitment therapy with an ecological momentary intervention where we use a smartphone to actually implement the things we learn in therapy in daily life. And so after each session with the therapist, people would have 3 days where several times per day they would get a beep, they would do some self-reporting, and then they would do an exercise. And what was very interesting, this was tested in people in the early phases of psychosis, so at risk mental state and first episodes of psychosis. And what we found was that this was particularly helpful to treat negative symptoms and to treat functioning. So what we see from pre to post, we don't see much difference. So this was treatment as usual compared to ACTL plus treatment as usual. Treatment as usual did include cognitive behavioral therapy. But what's very interesting is that you see that over time, at 6 and 12 months follow-up, the negative symptoms kept decreasing, whereas in the treatment as usual group only, over time, negative symptoms started to increase again. And so I think this is what is really relevant for me here in this also today, is that this kind of interventions is then also helping us to better understand what are the psychological mechanisms and what are potential psychological targets that we can treat in certain individuals. Of course, not in everyone, absolutely not, but very similar to all the previous discussions. I think we can also there differentiate and target certain individuals. And then we, back. Yeah. And then we saw a similar, there was an increase in functioning in all the groups, but more so in the group here. And I think that is then going to the end of my talk. So where we move here in the psychological field from just face-to-face therapy to ecological momentary interventions where we use digital technology to bring the therapy to the real world. I think the next step then, and that brings us a step closer again to precision psychiatry, is GTIs, just-in-time adaptive interventions. And what is the difference between the two? In an EMI, you just use your app, your smartphone to deliver an intervention at any moment in time in real life. With a just-in-time adaptive intervention, you actually try to identify the moments of risk and intervene at these moments. One of them, within my lab, we're also interested in self-harm, for example. What you want to do is try to intervene at moments when people have a strong urge to self-harm. And can you then, at that moment, intervene, do something so that they don't do that? So what we need for that is we need to collect data in real life. We need to define moments of risk, but not just moments of risk, also moments of receptivity. So you need to find that fine balance between when there's more risk, but also when people are still receptive to an intervention. You need to do that for every individual because it's going to be different for every individual. And also you want to do that, potentially you also want to give another intervention depending on the current context and current situation. So you're not only trying to target individuals and moments of risk within that individual, but you may also want to give a different intervention depending on what is at that moment happening. So that is the adaptive part. That is where the adaptive intervention comes from. What is very helpful in this kind of developments is that we then also can use micro-randomized trials. So rather than randomizing individuals, two different groups. What you could do is actually in your daily life, in these moments, you can at some moments give the intervention, at other moments you don't. Or you give a different intervention, you don't give the target intervention or something else. So you can look really within the moment, from moment to moment, whether your intervention is helpful or not. Of course, that means that these interventions are targeting a specific experience behavior in that moment. This is not like on the big scale, but it's really trying to get down into the moment and see whether in these moments you can make changes. So I think there is a lot of promise for digital phenotyping, for digital interventions as well, that it can help us moving forward to more precision psychiatry. I also feel that it's really helpful for me to be here today as well, because I think as a field, we need to look at all the different perspectives and see how in all these different ways we can move forward to more precise and more precision psychiatry. I just want to highlight in terms of the European Medical Device Regulation on digital interventions, and I was very happy to hear earlier on that we're not the only ones worried about this, but there's at this moment a real big problem. Innovation is really stuck. Because the current medical device regulation for digital devices is based on intended purpose. Commercial tech companies, they all say their intended purpose is lifestyle or well-being. That means that you're outside of the regulation, that you can do whatever you want. That means that these devices are not tested. They're called science-based, but they're not evidence-based. And they can just go to market. Whenever you want to test something, you have to go to an ethical committee, and then you're falling under the competent authorities, because ethical committees say this is a medical device, this intended purpose is not lifestyle, this is actually medical. And then you're stuck. It costs, after all the testing, an additional 250,000 euros to just bring it to market. This is often done in universities, in small startup companies, small tech companies. They don't have the money. You don't find investors for it because you're competing with a completely unregulated market that is just free. And so this means that we are pushing today unregulated, non-tested devices that are freely available for the safety of our patients, whereas anything that is properly tested gets stuck, doesn't make it to the market to protect our patients. And I think that is a real problem that we need to tackle. This is really something that's currently stopping or very much limiting innovation in the digital sphere. So to conclude, I think something as ESM can contribute to more detailed, personalized outcome measures, can help us to get a better understanding of any of the treatments that we're dealing with to identify better treatment outcomes. A smart integration of active and passive monitoring would be really helpful to really get a better understanding of what is happening in the daily life of people, but then not just also really learn more about the daily life psychological mechanisms that we can target. So it can help to target treatment to personal needs of each individual, make it more person-centered. I think giving people an active role in their treatment is super helpful. And that it also in the light of discussions that we have yesterday may help in reaching underserved groups. But in order to do that, we need definitely more research, but we also need an adaptation of the medical device regulation for digital tools, because currently, yeah, we have things on the shelves, not just us, many people in Europe, and yeah, they just stay on the shelves because we're not allowed to give them to people. And that's it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Inez. I need to take some advice now because we're way over on time. whether we've got time for a couple of questions or whether we roll straight into the final talk of the evening.
I didn't see any real burning questions.
There aren't any questions online. So it's, oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, maybe we could just follow up.
Well, I think maybe the other way of doing it is we'll ask the speakers to have a look at the questions that are coming online, and maybe they can give an online answer at that moment. But we've had a really good session. Thanks everybody for staying in some degree of attentive state through it. We can probe to find our contextual psychiatric context through that period. So can we just give a round of applause to the contributors in this session?